I studied at Glasgow School of Art, and I studied under Mick Manning, and he'd been at the Royal College and he'd done a natural history MA, so that was good. So I had this kindred spirit as a teacher. He got me drawing outside, and he knew a lot about plants and animals. And then I went to the Royal College and studied under John Norris Wood, who'd taught Mick, but he'd also been taught by Edward Borden and worked alongside Borden in his studio. He'd also been to Cedric Morris's summer school at Benton End. So I was in this world of English mid-20th century art and design. I had other interests coming in. A close friend in York had a lot of Piper's lithographs, and I looked at those. So those were big influences on the way that I looked visually at stuff. But it was kind of odd in a way being at art college and being into those people, because at that moment they weren't nearly as popular as they are now. I was a bit out on a limb in one sense, but because of my interest in landscape and nature and plants, and it made sense to look at that area because they were drawing the same things that I wanted to draw. I'd done print at Glasgow and at the Royal College, and I'd drawn and used watercolour. But I really had a moment, like after I left the Royal College, where I began to use collage. And suddenly I found something that really, really worked for me. It gave me a kind of graphic quality. It gave me a capacity to compose in a really, really strong way. So suddenly I felt like I'd found my medium. There's nothing I like better than to find visual equivalents for things just lying around, whether it's a bit of paper that wrapped up some flowers, or a bit of old newsprint, or a Florentine pattern paper. You know, I enjoy bringing those things together and making them work. I enjoy playing off the tensions of the different materials. Collage really taught me how to print as well, because it's about layering. So then when I came to do lithographs for the first time at the Kirwan, I knew a lot what I was doing from having looked at other lithographic images, you know, old children's books, picture puffins. I kind of had a good idea of how lithography worked, but also I thought in layers, and I could see the potential for bringing different marks into the lithographic process by photocopying onto acetate and layering up. So in effect, I was just collaging on the films, but then obviously the process flattens everything out, and there's something so satisfying again about bringing a range of different sorts of marks, and then the lithographic process is wonderfully unifying because it brings everything together. I've always enjoyed artefacts. Certain things have triggers. I like old toys. I like Staffordshire pottery. I like, to a certain extent, some stuffed animals in cases. I like a kind of museum-like feel, and I enjoy looking for objects. I was very inspired by these artists' interiors from the mid-20th century, so Peggy Angus, Olive Cook and Edwin Smith, and also the Enid Marks collection that's at Compton Verney, and her take on popular art, the book that she wrote with Margaret Lambert, Barbara Jones's Unsophisticated Art. I had a real interest in the objects that turn up in these books. So over time, I'd go to car boot sales and collect things, and I find almost buying an object or finding an object quite similar to actually creating one yourself. They both satisfy a similar aesthetic impulse. Obviously, if you make it, it's a bit more virtuous, but if you find something cheap and bring it home and you think, oh, that's a wonderful object, that does feel almost like an act of creativity, and then placing it next to other things is like making a three-dimensional collage. I got given the chance to have an exhibition alongside Borden and Revilius at Scarborough. And I thought, well, actually, they're pretty good at what they do. I'd quite like to do something slightly different. So rather than just exhibiting my own work cold, I thought I'd like to create a kind of museum that looked at objects alongside images and conjured up a sense of sort of magic in a kind of behind the scenes of a museum sort of way, or Sarki's The Lumber Room. There's also this fantastic thing called Collector's Items from the Saturday Book, which was a visual album of totally miscellaneous objects, but chosen by the connoisseur and the artist's eye and composed in a kind of playful way in a book form. So all of those were inspirations for this room that I created, and it was called the Magpie Eye. So the idea of an all-seeing, collecting eye that likes sparkling things, or at least interesting things. As well as making just pictures to go on a wall or prints, I enjoy objects, so I have a feeling that I want to design objects. People that I admire have also designed objects, so the Pipers, the Bordens, they've all been generally creative people who've applied their skills to a range of things. It's about enjoying the visual quality in the objects that surround you. That's really the impetus for me to actually make anything. Also, there's a lovely thing about designing something that people can just buy. They might not want to buy a big painting for £1,000, but they could buy a cushion. And actually, that really appeals to me, to design something that's functional, that's domestic, because I like creating a home, I like creating a wonderful space. You know, given the possibility to design fabric was great. So working with St Jude's was a really, really good opportunity, because somebody was there to produce and give me a reason to have a go at making a textile.